Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and Diablo 4 is finally embracing its role as a sequel to Diablo 3. With its upcoming expansion, we're seeing a massive overhaul to the game that is transforming it into something completely different. The D4 devs also shared what percentage of the player base plays solo, and I bet the answer will surprise you. In this video, we'll go over a roundup of Diablo 4 news of the week, as well as touch upon a couple other news stories in the gaming world, like why Black Myth Wukong has yet to release on Xbox, and 2 big game failures this week. But starting right off with Diablo 4 news. We'll start with a wrap-up of a few more details that have trickled in from the Gamescom interviews from last week. From a Windows Central interview, we learned that there are currently no cosmetic customization options for the mercenaries. The quest to unlock mercs will not need to be repeated each season, but leveling up your rapport with your mercenaries in order to level up their skill trees will need to be repeated every season. We also got confirmation that the Dark Citadel, the raid, will scale in difficulty with player numbers. And again, it's minimum 2 players. No, your mercenaries will not fill up the additional slots. From an interview with streamer Onacake, we learned that a whopping 85% of Diablo 4 players currently choose to play solo. That is a staggeringly high number, much higher than I expected, which makes the choice of adding a raid that cannot be completed solo even more bizarre to me, when the vast majority of the player base chooses to play solo. Now, part of the reason for adding this group activity is to encourage group play, and the devs believe the solo player number percentage will drop as a result of this. And in fairness, if Diablo 4 had more robust social features to facilitate grouping, I do imagine the numbers already would look a lot better. Diablo 2 had player lobbies and chat rooms. Diablo 3 had instant matchmaking and community groups. Diablo 4 is the least social of these Diablo games. But with the introduction of the group finder with Vessel of Hatred, that may be about to change. Outside of that, I hope we also get to see more clan support in the future. Clans exist now, but it would be nice to have, say, clan housing or otherwise just more going on with clans. Then, from an interview with streamer Rob, we learned that during testing, the devs felt that having the mercenaries be as powerful as players didn't feel right, and so they decided to have mercenaries focus on buffing the player. And I think this is the right approach. You don't want your sidekick outshining you, but then if he's weaker than you, he can feel basically useless. So being a support for you, that just feels right. And that's the role they're most appreciated in both Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. They're there to help us with our builds. So in Diablo 4, Subo the Archer will give us resource cost reduction and cooldown reduction buffs. Rhykker the Shield Bearer, he's going to give us armor and resistance buffs. And we're not sure yet what the other 2 do, but if I had to guess, maybe attack speed buffs, crit chance, or crit damage buffs. Maybe even applying vulnerable to enemies for us. That'll help sorcerers. Or maybe buffing our damage over time. Overall, I think they'll be more offensive leaning. Now, it seems that the mercenaries will operate kind of like how they operate in D3. When they die, they don't actually die, they just take a knee, and it takes them 45 minutes, I meant 45 seconds, to catch their breath and get back into the fight. Or you can click on them to revive them in order to speed this up. Mercenaries will not count as minions or companions for the purposes of synergies with skills or aspects. Also, even if you're playing as a party, you can still earn rapport with your mercenaries. So you don't have to play solo just to level up your mercenaries, which is good because some people just only group play. And even in groups, you still get to use your passive mercenary. As a reminder, you have one active and one reinforcement or passive mercenary. We're getting 2 new character slots with the expansion, plus 13 unique cat mounts, including jaguars, panthers, lions, tigers, oh my. I really hope we can get a rebirth option one day, so instead of having to delete your old characters to make room for new characters in the new season, you just rebirth an old character, and that means you keep the same name of the character, the same appearance, the same hours played are still saved on this character, but they are reset down to level 1, all the gear is mailed to your eternal stash, and they get converted into a level 1 fresh seasonal character. Oh, and Nightmare Dungeons will be available for leveling as of level 1. Interesting change. Then from an interview with streamer Udijo, we learned that Blizzard has no plans for more defined player roles in a party. Like in a traditional MMO, you have the healer, the tank, the DPS. So it seems they're not looking to design the raid co-op mechanics with something like that in mind. They want any class to be able to do any interaction with the mechanics, and I'm glad about this. I prefer in my ARPGs that roles are not established by the devs, but rather emerge naturally from player builds. For instance, in Diablo 3, you have DPS builds, and then you have different support builds. But the devs never went out to make a support class or a support build. It was emergent gameplay that led to this. Okay, on to the biggest news of this week though, the patch 2.0 campfire chat. It was the longest campfire chat yet, with the most amount of content to get through, over 2 hours. I got a summary video going over everything, but we'll touch upon some highlights here, as well as some extra details. First off, they're completely redoing the difficulty system. Level scaling. Max level will now be 60 with 300 Paragon levels on top of that. This affects monster scaling, item power. Sacred items are entirely gone. This is just going to feel like a whole new game now with regards to progressing to our final build. And the changes overall make Diablo 4 look like Diablo 3 2.0. We're fully leaning into the D3 influence now. They had to distance themselves from D3 when D4 launched due to the stigma that Diablo 3 carried. But now that all the D2 folks have left D4 and D4 has increasingly moved towards being more and more like D3 every season, much to the game's improvement, I might add, we are now taking a full dive into D3 territory, and it seems it's for the better. The new difficulty system is very similar to Diablo 3's. The new glyph system is similar to Diablo 3 Legendary Gems. The pit they added in Season 4 was Greater Rifts. The new Paragon system is more like Diablo 3's, with Paragon levels shared across your characters. Now, that said, they're taking inspiration from D3 systems with an understanding of what problems those systems had and how to solve those problems in Diablo 4. For instance, Diablo 3 had like 20 different difficulty settings, but only a few of them were relevant. The different difficulties now in D4 will feel like meaningful progression steps rather than just smooth and easy transitions. Before you reach level 60, you'll have 4 different difficulty levels. And then once you hit 60, you unlock an additional 4, Torments 1 through 4. And one thing we learned in the patch notes after the campfire chat is that each Torment level will impose an increasing penalty to our armor and resistances. In current day D4, depending on your class and build, it can be really easy to max out your armor and your resists. And it's looking like it'll be more difficult to do so at higher difficulties in Season 6. By Torment 4, we have a negative 100% penalty to our resistances, as well as a negative 1,000 to our armor, and our armor cap is just 1,000. Then other big news, rune words were announced. As we predicted last week, yes, the second socket in the helm was indeed a sign that rune words were coming. They're very different from Diablo 2 rune words, however. They're similar, instead, almost identical to the original Diablo 4 rune words that were presented to us years ago. It's the 2-rune word system with a trigger rune and an effect rune. So there's hundreds of potential combinations, and it looks like they're really opening up some build options. You can even use runes as components to craft mythic uniques, and you can trade runes just like the good old days. For full details on how rune words will work, you can check out my other video. Another significant thing they've managed to do is revitalize Nightmare Dungeons. They basically swapped the roles of the Pit and Nightmare Dungeons. Now we level up our glyphs in the Pit, and we farm masterworking materials in Nightmare Dungeons. And this actually works perfectly. Nightmare Dungeons are tedious right now because we just want to race to the end to get our glyph XP, but the entire design of the dungeon is basically made to slow us down. Whereas pits are just about blasting straight to the end super fast, and they're designed to facilitate that gameplay. Now, masterworking materials will drop from every chest and elite pack and just everywhere in Nightmare Dungeons. So you're not going to feel like you're wasting time when you go down the wrong branch or, just killing monsters. Then we've got confirmation that an armory is in the works in order to save and load our builds, but it won't be coming with Season 6. And they also confirmed that we're getting a Season 6 mechanic, which we technically didn't have in Seasons 4 or 5. Every class is getting 1 new active skill plus some new passive skills. The rogue, for instance, is getting a spin to win knife throwing skill, and I'm all about that. Overall, I was really impressed with the presentation. Prior to this, I was getting really concerned about a huge shakeup in the foundation of the game. We kept seeing signs that this was coming, and it was concerning me. We finally got the game into a good, fun state. Season 5 is the best season, is the best Diablo 4 has ever been. And now what? We're going to suddenly change the formula. But this campfire chat inspired a lot of confidence. Seasons 4, 5, and now 6 are looking to be absolute bangers. They've been building up momentum, and if the team can keep cooking like this, Diablo 4 is going to rocket up my list of best ARPGs. Oh, and a great quality of life change. We'll be able to select our town portal waypoint. Thank goodness. Goodbye, Giacool. Hello, Karagar. Another addition that was not covered in the campfire chat, but was found in the patch notes. We're not just getting 2 new mythic uniques, but a third. The Shattered Vow, mythic unique polearm. Its special power is to execute enemies that are afflicted by more damage over time than remaining life. And on lucky hit, you have a big chance to become berserking, a mechanic normally left to barbarians. Any execute mechanic in Diablo games has led to broken combos. We'll see how this one works out, but so far this seems like a bleed barbarian's dream mythic. We'll be getting a PTR launching next Wednesday to test out the changes, but meanwhile, WoW had data mined the PTR contents and found something undocumented, something that was later confirmed by Pez Radar. Massive changes are coming to gems. First off, we're getting a new tier of gem, but more importantly, rubies will no longer give max life. Instead, they'll give strength. This will really shake up the meta of everyone popping rubies in their helm, pants, and chests for a ton more max life. Now, we're likely to see people go with their main stat for more damage. Oh, and of course, the 2 rune words that we're allowed to use per build. So outside of that news, the Goblin event has been running this week, and between that and Infernal Hordes, Season 5 has really highlighted that, once again, we may need a loot filter. Now, I've always held that needing a loot filter is a symptom of a problem, that games should never need a loot filter. And I would rather solve the problem at its root than just slap a loot filter on a game to allow us to ignore the problem. But I've also said that if we cannot find a way to solve the problem at its core, then yes, we need a loot filter. Thanks to Infernal Hordes, we're getting a ton of items to drop again, and with the Goblin events, there's so much junk dropping, and loot bags are the same color as yellow items, and you're trying to find the boss materials to click on, and everything just slows down as you're sifting through everything on screen. And this is all 100 times worse on controller, where you can't selectively pick one item among 10. You have to pick up everything. So one way to add a loot filter would actually be to allow our pets to automatically salvage certain items. So, for instance, you can set your pet to automatically salvage anything that doesn't have at least 1 greater affix on it. Or earlier in the game, anything that is yellow or lower, it'll automatically salvage. And it's going to go around and it's going to pick up all the junk and auto-salvage it, leaving you with the loot that you want to pick up. So rather than hiding items, it's gobbling them up and breaking them down. The pet becomes a loot filter by turning it into a mobile junk scrapper. All the filter options that you'd put on a loot filter, put them instead on the pet. Then in other news, Black Myth Wukong continues to do very well. Within 4 days of launch, the game reached 10 million sales across all platforms, and it hasn't even released on Xbox yet. By comparison, some of the top-selling games of 2023 included Hogwarts Legacy, which reached 12 million units sold in its first 2 weeks, and Tears of the Kingdom, which hit 10 million in 3 days. So yeah, Wukong is doing excellently. It peaked at 2.4 million concurrent players on Steam, helping Steam itself reach a new max concurrent player record of 37 million concurrents. And allegedly, the reason the game has yet to release on Xbox is because it has failed Xbox certification twice due to a memory leak. And this memory leak is also present in the PlayStation and PC version of the game. The longer you play the game, the more memory it consumes until eventually the game crashes or suffers performance issues. And since Xbox has less RAM, it makes sense that it would suffer more greatly from the memory leak. But it's still surprising that the game passed PlayStation certification, because a memory leak is a pretty serious issue. On PlayStation at least, it apparently takes over 5 hours for the memory leak to get bad enough to present issues though. Then Ubisoft Star Wars Outlaws released this week, and it's gotten decent reviews from critics. 77 out of 100 average on OpenCritic, with 71% of critics recommending it. I've seen its open world praised, for a Ubisoft game at least. And I've seen critics complain about bugs. Hopefully those are solved in the launch version. Overall, seems like a competent enough game, but probably something you can wait to pick up when it's on sale or via Ubisoft Plus. But if any of you have started playing yet, what are your first impressions? Sound off in the comments. In other news, Sony's highly anticipated FPS hero shooter Overwatch clone Concord released last week, and it has probably been the biggest flop of the year. It received mixed reviews from critics, averaging around 65 out of 100 on OpenCritic, with only 23% of the critics recommending the game. It released on both PlayStation and on Steam, and on Steam its peak concurrent player count reached a whopping 660 people. That's it. 660. That's fewer than 1,000 concurrent players for a AAA game published by Sony that has been in development for 8 years and likely cost millions upon millions of dollars to make. Now you can argue all you want that the game has more players on PlayStation. Probably does, but come on. Fewer than 1,000 concurrents for a AAA multiplayer release on Steam is catastrophic. These are the kinds of numbers that lead to studio closures. And I feel bad for developer Firewalk Studios. This game was doomed. 8 years ago, 2016, that's when Overwatch released, and it was a huge success. Blizzard also spent a huge amount of money on an enormous marketing campaign for that game. Those of you who remember back then, this game was everywhere. Everyone knew about Overwatch. So plans for Concord began then, clearly seeing the success of Overwatch and clearly attempting to ape off of the success, as so many other games have attempted to do since then. The problem is that Concord released several years too late with zero marketing. I didn't even know this game had released until I started hearing stories about it flopping. Then the game reviews poorly with critics. It lacks the visual charm of Overwatch. I mean, look at these character designs. They're laughably bad. Now, if you folks know me, I hate to be overly critical. I understand that there are human beings behind every game that releases, and I don't like putting people down. And I think the execution was done well, but it's properly executing just ugly, uninspired designs. And I wonder how anyone thought these looked like cool or good-looking costumes that anyone would be inspired to like make cosplay of or fan art about. So what we're left with Concord is a mediocre Overwatch without any of Overwatch's interesting character designs, with the same $40 price tag that Overwatch launched with, but in an era where the genre has moved to free-to-play. Even Overwatch has moved to free-to-play. They're late to the party with an inferior product that costs money when the competition doesn't. Terrible decisions were made here, likely at executive levels, and I expect to hear news of servers shutting down for good within 6 months, and Firewalk Studios shutting down within a year. Not because I think they deserve it, not because I hope for it. I'm sure that there was a lot of publisher meddling and otherwise meddling going on to make all this happen, but this is just what happens when a AAA studio works on a game for 8 years and then releases a commercial flop. Another story this week. I got some bad news for folks waiting for the Western release of Blue Protocol. It's never going to happen, and the game is shutting down. The Japanese RPG developed by Bandai Namco that released in June 2023 in Japan will be discontinued on January 18th, 2025, and will never see the global release version that was going to be published by Amazon Game Studios. Looking into things, it seems Japanese players complain about a lack of endgame loop, and the game is generally not in a great state now, a year after launch. The devs have steadily been making improvements, but I guess it was too little too late, unfortunately. And we'll end by talking about the first look we got this week at the gameplay trailer of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I remember when this game was first revealed, it definitely piqued my curiosity. It's a turn-based RPG with real-time elements in a beautifully fantastical world with some innovative combat mechanics. I'm loving the overall aesthetics of this one, even if the running animations are looking a little stiff right now. Hopefully that gets improved. And that's going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to check out last week's video in which we discussed the proposed solution for bricking in Diablo 4. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my supporters. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more gaming content.